Hello. I hope you had a good week and got to watch some interesting movies. Please get your film reviews into me via email and then send also your thoughts about The Graduate, which can be a less formal submission. I thought I'd share with you some of the results of the film survey I handed out. You're a diverse group in your viewing habits, and interestingly, the most watched movies were all from before you were born. Number one, with 9 votes, over half the class, is a tie between The Breakfast Club and Grease. We'll be seeing The Breakfast Club later this term, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about it then. Number 2 in votes, with 8 votes, is a 3-way tie, The West Side Story. I had suggested the 1961 version. I don't know if that's what you guys were talking about when you were checking that, or the newer one. Dirty Dancing and Boys in the Hood. Also, more than half the class. And we'll be seeing Boys in the Hood also later this semester. Number 3 with 7 votes was The Outsiders, the Francis Coppola film. And I was very impressed with how the rest of your viewing showed up. You're a movie-loving group, which I appreciate. So these are all good films that certainly discuss the themes of growing up, forging your own identity, taking on some adult responsibilities. I just want to encourage you to see more films on the list that may not be familiar to you so much. John Sayles' film Baby It's You from 1983 got no votes. Pump Up the Volume from 1990 was a significant film in terms of youth culture. And some foreign films on the list are worth seeing to gain kind of a diverse and non-Hollywood perspective on the genre. There are plenty of films on the list featuring foreign and minority characters, mostly more recent movies, if that's of interest to you. I'm looking forward to seeing what films you watch and hearing your thoughts about them. Also, if you have any lingering questions about Rebel Without a Cause, something that stuck with you, care to comment on, please feel free to email me about that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Okay, so onward we go. In 1966, Time magazine named as its Man of the Year, quote, "those men and women aged 25 and younger," unquote. Their impact on American society had become inescapable. The demographics accounted for half the population of the United States. And they had become more assertive, articulate, educated, and independent than had any generation before them. I wonder, do you still feel that way about your generation now? How do you feel your generation fits into American society? Think about that. Write me if you have any particular thoughts or questions about that. So these young people in the 1960s were also the most discussed and examined in history, raised in an unparalleled period of prosperity and world peace. Instead of depending on their parents for guidance, this generation would do their own thing, as they like to say. They openly questioned authority, protested social injustice, and perhaps ironically, in such a wealthy society that benefited them greatly, discussed a rejection of their parents' materialistic values. Not to belittle the content of these arguments, but you have to find it interesting that only in a society with such great wealth and middle-class prosperity do you find people discussing the evils of materialism. The very discussion is a luxury. This was a point generally they didn't recognize until they got a little older and more mature. Fashion, music, hairstyles, other trends were increasingly driven by the tastes and the earned dollars of this younger generation. They were cruising the streets on scooters, motorcycles, and cars, crowding restaurants. Their legitimate demands were being recognized by business and advertising, if not by the political establishment. At the same time, perhaps unsurprisingly, crime committed by young people was also on the rise. From murder to drug trafficking to traffic fatalities, young people were increasingly involved. Teenage marriage was on the rise, though not necessarily, arranged by families as it had been in the past. And STDs were also on the rise. This young adult generation simply took over a greater demographic role in all areas. But it was something very new and shocking to almost everyone. The 1979 British film Quadrophenia captures that feeling of youth society running amok in England in the 1960s. The conflict of the very fashionable mods versus the leather-wearing rockers represented not just a style rivalry, but a struggle by the whole generation to define a new identity that was different than their parents. Hollywood's reactionary cycle against this JD culture of the 50s, with its inaccurate and juvenile jokes, its squeaky clean imagery and authority-centric point of view, could not be sustained. While Hollywood poured out another beach blanket bingo retread, foreign cinema was blossoming, and foreign films were reaching America in increasing art house theaters that competed with the Hollywood brand. These foreign films were also gaining prominence in print with the rising prestige of film criticism, which film criticism today, you see people blog about it, the major newspapers have brief film reviews. That's different than what film criticism really started to become in the late 60s. It became much more of a literary arts criticism, a more formal examination. And that still goes on today. You can still find a lot of film journals, and that's where I encourage you to do your research for this course, not just to look at what the major newspapers are putting out in terms of movie reviews. Something qualitatively different. During this point in history in the 60s, the French New Wave came into being, influencing film language with new approaches to editing and cinematography, and with much more explicit sexual content, anti-religious messaging, and themes of alienation. Japanese cinema followed suit. Latin American cinema offered decidedly political, Marxist, anti-authoritarian voices, which is sort of ironic with the right-wing regimes that were coming to power there. There was the start of a move toward greater abstraction in both visuals and narratives, originating largely from young filmmakers outside of America. All the old structures were coming under attack by and for this new young adult demographic. In Czechoslovakia, the 1964 film Black Peter by the great Miloš Forman, his first feature, introduced improvisation in acting and camera work in a story about a young man's struggle to make his own way despite family and social pressures. In the UK, Richard Lester's Beatles films Hard Day's Night and Help had a new, fresh spontaneity that would set up the whole language for music videos from the start of MTV through today. And then there was this.
Sometimes reality is the strangest fantasy of all. The films of Michelangelo Antonioni speak every language. This is his first in English.
What's your name? What do they call you in bed?
Blow Up, starring Vanessa Redgrave, David Hemmings, and Sarah Miles. Blow Up is the most critically acclaimed film of the year and winner of 2 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director. Antonioni's camera never flinches at love without meaning, murder without guilt, at the dazzle and the madness of London today. You are an eyewitness to what's happening in a world where the beautiful and the bizarre take on new forms and hold new fascinations. Blow Up is an astonishing glimpse of today, seen through Antonioni's camera, his color, his London, his first English language film.
I thought you were supposed to be in Paris.
I am in Paris.
Someone's been killed.
Yeah, I was right.
I want you to see the corpse.
Blow Up, the Carlo Ponte production.
Michelangelo Antonioni's film Blow Up in 1966 was reinventing film language and narrative possibility while being set in swinging London, then the international center of popular culture, fashion, style, and trendiness. Ostensibly, it's a murder mystery, but what little plot there is incidental to what the film is really about. The Austin Powers movies, if you've seen any of them, they make fun of this place and the period, but Blow Up and Antonioni show you what it was in reality. Its glamour, style, free sexuality, marijuana use, rock clubs, anarchic joy and rebellion, along with selfishness and a young adult generation that was feeling empowered, entitled, and at the same time, empty. By today's standards, Blow Up feels tame, arty, sometimes slow-moving. The trailer is, comically titillating. But at the time, it was both groundbreaking and scandalous. With its pervasive drug use and free sexuality, Blow Up directly challenged what level of nudity and explicit sexuality would be tolerated by the censors. While for Antonioni, this was a move toward commercialism. By American standards, it's very abstract cinema that, unlike the Hollywood model, it doesn't spoon-feed you meaning or emotional instruction. Much of the film is provocative, but offers no clear answers or explanation or resolution. You're intended to make meaning out of it yourself. We talked about how Rebel Without a Cause was also prescient in introducing a form of this tone, seminal and ahead of its time. Blow Up is about oppositions in society, rich and poor, definitions of masculinity, artifice versus reality. What's superficial? What's real? How do you find and define meaning? The whole film is like a strange dream, both meditative and shocking, all qualities not found in American film, either then or now, for the most part. The British-Italian co-production captured well the passion and displacement of young adults at this time. It helped usher in a new film language, and it was very successful internationally. The Hollywood studios, with their classic style and their old business model, were kind of flailing in the face of television's rise, the foreign influences, and all the demographic shifts. They finally realized they had to address the voices and desires of this new generation. So, of course, to cash in on the counterculture, initially came exploitation pictures, like Riot on the Sunset Strip, one of the first films to show someone dropping LSD, and Wild in the Streets, a farce about how young people take over the federal government. These are lively films that attempt to be timely, yet they really showed how out of touch the studios were. In 1966, a new code replaced the old 1934 production code that we talked about last week. This new version opposed censorship, but set new standards to govern the progressive direction that movies were taking. With all the changes, the rules of regulation were really a moving target. The summer of 1967 was called the Summer of Love, the pinnacle of hippie culture. Some have called this period revolutionary. Others have called it completely narcissistic. It's not one or the other. A lot of things were going on at this point. With the Cold War raging, the specter of the Vietnam War rising, and many foreign cultural influences invading what had been a rather insular American culture, there was a lot of change happening. And to many, it was dizzying. This week's film, The Graduate, released in December of 1967, was ostensibly to just be a sex comedy about an inexperienced young man. But the film resonated far beyond this crass theme. The film is much more about what was happening in American society, with the younger generation's rejection of adults' middle-class values. Divorce, for instance, had never been addressed so directly in a major motion picture. Its treatment here, threatening the sacrosanct institution of marriage, was whiplash. Today, It's almost default in most movies, but take you back to 1960s. To discuss divorce out in the open was another shocking thing. The camera work of the film, editing, the expressive production design were all influenced by experimental trends happening outside America. I spend so much time talking about Blow Up because while The Graduate is much more story-based, it couldn't have been made without the influence of Blow Up. Showing a film with the content and the abstract style that the young adult audience wanted. The use of popular music in The Graduate was novel, choosing several songs by the same group, Simon and Garfunkel, some of which were written specifically for the movie, including Mrs. Robinson. The film established Simon and Garfunkel, their significance in popular music. Like Rebel Without a Cause, The Graduate resonated with its own generation of young adults. There was so much change happening in society. Counterculture, the Vietnam War, the breakdown of the family, the sense of being separated from mainstream society. Most big films of 1967 flopped. The Graduate was a big hit. The modern style and the themes of being baffled, directionless, paralyzed by the flurry of changes in society, these connected wildly. The filmmakers based the movie on the admonitions, I want to quote here what they said, "Don't bargain away your life for the appearance of security. Seek the truth, don't settle, wake up and fight for it." You all may soon be in a similar position of Ben Braddock, the lead character in the film, The Graduate. If you have not seen the film yet, please screen it now and watch the rest of this lecture afterwards. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed the movie and that you have questions about it. You should. The Graduate was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and it won for Best Director, Mike Nichols. Within a year, plastics manufacturing was booming, affected by the film or reflecting the times. This bears some examination. Did you notice that the older characters are not given first names, only the young people? This was done for effect to accentuate the generation gap. The ending of the film was, as scripted, supposed to show Benjamin and Elaine on the bus laughing joyously. However, because the director, Mike Nichols, had been shouting at the actors to laugh, they actually got very nervous during the take. When Nichols saw the footage in the editing room, he decided that this was the correct note to end on. I would say that, perhaps by serendipity, this decision makes all the difference. I'll look forward to hearing your reactions to the movie. What resonated with you? What surprised you? How are parts of the film relevant to your experience? Where is the film anachronistic today? What doesn't hold up? How do the sensibilities and concerns of this 1960s generation of young people differ from that seen in Rebel Without a Cause? What's the same? Good questions to think about. What does the ending of the film mean to you? If they had been happier, would that have made a difference? The movie's second half is mostly such a farcical escapist romp. I think this final nervous shot of the actors is necessary to bring the story back down to earth, to refocus you on what it all means. If they had been too happy, you would have left the movie full of that blind joy at the caper of pulling Elaine out of the wedding. You would have forgotten everything else that came before that moment. This iconic ending has been repeated, borrowed in other youth films, like the 1989 movie Say Anything, and parodied in 1992's Wayne's World. There are certain aspects of the film that continue to resonate with a young adult generation trying to find their place. Another perspective on the movie. While the film remains a classic, 30 years after its release, critic Roger Ebert took another look at the film and wrote that he felt it wasn't as relevant anymore. With the span of time, he said he now had a lot more sympathy for Mrs. Robinson. And he felt that Ben was maybe a little bit of a creep. Your thoughts? What do you think? It's not an all or nothing proposition. How did you feel watching the movie? Do you feel the same now that you think about it with a more analytical eye? Regardless of whether it holds up over time, the success of The Graduate spoke to Hollywood studio executives. They saw this new direction of cinema taking artistic, aesthetic, and sociological chances. The rebel didn't have to suffer in the end, as generally had been the rule. Although, again, we discussed how Jim Stark in Rebel, he survived. Edginess was going mainstream. The new code of 1966 led, in 1968, to a rating system similar to what we have today, that opened the door for a much broader variety of thematic content. The late 60s and early 70s saw the reins of Hollywood power shift to members of the baby boom generation. There was a younger, bolder outlook to more films and concern over real issues facing society. Endings to films were bleaker, and there was, in movies, a prevailing unease over the state of things in America. Some of these movies flopped. After the success of Blow Up, MGM brought director Michelangelo Antonioni to America and gave him a big budget. But 1970s film Zabriskie Point, a sort of mod 60s sex romp in the California desert, was a huge flop. Nearly sunk the studio MGM. Consequently, the studio had to be sold to investor Kirk Kerkorian, and MGM has never been the same. And yet, these new filmmakers, working often with budgets of just a fraction of what the major studio productions had, made many films that resonated with the burgeoning younger generation. A more real and honest cinema was arriving. Okay, assignments for next week. Number 1, start thinking about your first comparative critique. Maybe what films do you want to compare or think about? What kind of ideas? Read in Rebels and Chicks through page 112. And continue to watch films and read reviews and articles. That's part of your assignment for this course, is to do your own research, to stay up to date. That's how you'll get the most out of this course, by not just doing what is sort of required and spoon-fed by me, but go explore, go read some articles, put that into your writing. And that's it. I'll see you next week.